money in students.
Tell us about Betsy Stockton, who was enslaved by an early 19th century president of Princeton.
The Stockton is actually was given to the wife of that president as a gift when she was a younger woman, and then through marriage actually comes into the household of Ashbel Green, the president of Princeton, who ends up president of Princeton. He eventually emancipates her. He also actually establishes, and this is that tension between slavery and anti-slavery, he establishes a ministry with many of the people in the black community surrounding Princeton. He emancipates her. She lives in the president's house and continues to work there, and actually becomes quite famous as a biblical scholar. She becomes quite good at biblical geography. And
spending most of her time in his library.
And noted for her geographic skills, her biblical geographic skills. She then eventually becomes a school teacher in New York and heads off to a mission to the Sandwich Islands, to Hawaii, where her skill with language and religion become actually critical to the success of the mission. And so you have this person who is born enslaved and lives as an enslaved person on a college campus, and then who leads this extraordinary life afterwards.
You also talk about race science. You talk about the search for cadavers for scientific research at these universities.
And one of the things I wanted to do with the book was to try and explain both how slavery and the slave trade provided the foundations for the rise of higher education in North America. But I also wanted to explain the role that colleges played in perpetuating slavery and the slave trade. And that's where you get to race science. That's where race science becomes critical, because it's precisely on campus that the ideas that come to defend slavery in the 19th century get refined. They get their intellectual legitimacy on campus. They get their scientific sort of veneer on campus. And they get their moral credentialing on campus. And so I wanted to trace that process. And one of the ugliest aspects of that is the use of marginalized people. In the Americas, in the United States, it's enslaved black people, often Native Americans, and sometimes the Irish, for experimentation. The bodies that were accessible as science rose, and science is rising in the 18th century, in part by turning dissection and anatomy into the new medical arts. But that requires bodies, it requires people. In the British Islands, that means you're often exploiting Ireland. In North America, it means you're often taking advantage of people who have no legal and moral protection upon their bodies, the enslaved.
Can you give an example?
Sure.